When groundskeepers at Queen Camilla's private estate in Wiltshire stumbled upon a hidden chamber beneath the centuries-old oak tree, they had no idea they were about to uncover secrets that would send shockwaves through the highest levels of British society. What started as routine maintenance work on the sprawling grounds of Raymill House quickly transformed into an investigation that would challenge everything the public thought they knew about the royal family's most controversial member. The discovery wasn't just unexpected, it was impossible to explain away. Documents, photographs, and artifacts spanning decades told a story so explosive that even seasoned royal correspondents struggled to believe the evidence before their eyes. As news of the find began to leak through carefully guarded channels, one question echoed through the corridors of Buckingham Palace. How long had Queen Camilla been keeping these secrets? And, more importantly, what was she planning to do with the information that could potentially destroy reputations and careers and reshape the very foundation of the modern monarchy? This is the true story of what was found at Raymill House, and why it raised questions that may never be fully answered. Thomas Hartwell had been working the grounds at Raymill House for nearly 15 years. The 62-year-old groundskeeper knew every inch of the 30-acre estate that had become Queen Camilla's private sanctuary, far from the prying eyes of the media and the rigid protocols of royal life. The Georgian Manor House, with its honey-colored stone walls and sprawling gardens, had been Camilla's refuge since long before she wore a crown. On that crisp October morning in 2024, Thomas was focused on what seemed like a routine task. The ancient oak tree that stood majestically in the center of the estate's formal gardens had been showing signs of root rot, and the royal household's arborist had recommended careful excavation around its base to assess the damage. The tree was reportedly over 400 years old, planted during the reign of James I, and its preservation was considered a matter of historical importance. Thomas began his work at dawn, using a combination of hand tools and a small mechanical digger to carefully remove soil from around the massive root system. The morning air was filled with the earthy scent of damp soil and fallen leaves as he methodically worked his way around the tree's circumference. Everything seemed perfectly normal until his spade struck something that definitely wasn't wood or root. The metallic clang echoed across the quiet gardens, causing a flock of starlings to burst from the nearby hedgerows. Thomas paused, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool morning temperature. In all his years working the grounds, he had occasionally found old pottery shards or rusted farm implements, remnants of the estate's long agricultural history. But this felt different. The resistance his spade had encountered suggested something substantial buried beneath the surface. Curiosity overtaking caution, Thomas began digging more carefully around the obstruction. What he uncovered first appeared to be the corner of a metal box, its surface green with patina but still remarkably intact. The box was larger than he had initially thought, measuring roughly 3 feet by 2 feet, and it seemed to be made of heavy-gauge steel or iron. Most intriguingly, it bore what appeared to be an official seal or crest, though decades of burial had made the details difficult to discern. Thomas knew immediately that this was beyond his authority to handle alone. He covered the box with a tarpaulin and secured the area before calling his supervisor, Martin Wheeler, the estate manager who had worked for the royal household for over 20 years. Wheeler arrived within 30 minutes, his usual calm demeanor betraying just a hint of excitement as he examined Thomas's discovery. The two men spent the better part of the morning carefully excavating around the box, revealing that it was actually part of a larger structure. What they had initially taken for a simple buried container was actually the entrance to a small underground chamber, roughly the size of a garden shed. The metal box served as a kind of door or access panel to the space below. The craftsmanship was remarkable, suggesting this wasn't some hastily constructed hiding place, but rather a purpose-built repository designed to protect whatever lay within. Wheeler made the decision to call the estate's security chief, a former Metropolitan Police detective named Sarah Collins, before proceeding further. Collins arrived with a small team of trusted personnel and immediately established a perimeter around the discovery site. The area was cordoned off with temporary fencing, and strict instructions were given that no one was to discuss what had been found with anyone outside the immediate circle of those already involved. The decision to open the chamber wasn't taken lightly. Collins spent nearly an hour on secure phone calls with various officials, including representatives from the Royal Protection Squad and the private secretary's office. The potential implications of whatever lay hidden beneath the centuries-old oak tree were clearly weighing heavily on everyone involved. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity of consultation and deliberation, the order came down to proceed with the investigation. Using specialized equipment brought in by Collins's team, they carefully opened the metal access panel. The hinges, despite their age, moved smoothly, suggesting they had been well maintained and possibly accessed more recently than the burial date might have suggested. A musty but not unpleasant odor emerged from the chamber, carrying hints of old paper and leather. The interior of the chamber was remarkably well preserved. The walls were lined with some kind of moisture-resistant material, and the floor was covered with what appeared to be original wooden planking. Along the walls were built-in shelves and storage compartments, most of them filled with carefully organized documents, photographs, and various artifacts. Everything was methodically labeled and cataloged, suggesting a highly organized mind behind the collection. Collins was the first to descend into the chamber, using a powerful flashlight to illuminate the space. Her initial assessment, radioed up to the surface team, was that they had uncovered what appeared to be a personal archive of some kind, containing materials dating back several decades. The sheer volume of documentation was staggering, filling dozens of filing boxes and storage containers. The first items Collins examined were a series of leather-bound journals, each one meticulously dated and bearing what appeared to be Camilla's distinctive handwriting. The journals dated back to the early 1970s, during the time when Camilla Parker Bowles was a young woman navigating London's social scene and beginning her complicated relationship with Prince Charles. The level of detail in these early entries was extraordinary, documenting not just her own thoughts and experiences but also conversations, events, and observations about the people around her. But it was the photographs that truly caught Collins's attention. Carefully preserved in acid-free storage boxes were hundreds of photographs spanning decades. Many featured Camilla with various members of the royal family, including intimate family gatherings, private moments, and events that had never been documented in the official royal photographs. There were pictures of Prince Charles that the public had never seen, showing a more relaxed and unguarded side of the future king. Some photographs appeared to have been taken during the tumultuous period of Charles's marriage to Diana, offering a perspective on that troubled time that contradicted much of the accepted narrative. Among the most intriguing items were what appeared to be transcripts of recorded conversations. These documents, typed on official letterhead from various government departments and private institutions, suggested that someone had been systematically documenting private discussions involving senior royals, government ministers, and other influential figures. The implications were staggering. If authentic, these transcripts represented a treasure trove of insider information about the workings of the British establishment. One particular file that caught Collins's immediate attention was labeled Insurance Policies and contained what appeared to be photocopies of sensitive documents related to various members of the royal family. Without conducting a detailed examination, it was impossible to determine the exact nature of these documents. But their very existence in Camilla's private archive raised serious questions about how she had obtained them and why she had chosen to preserve them in such an elaborate manner. The organization of the archive was meticulous, suggesting that this wasn't simply a random collection of memorabilia, but rather a carefully curated repository of information. Each section was clearly labeled and cross-referenced, with detailed indices that made it possible to quickly locate specific documents or photographs. Someone had spent considerable time and effort creating this system, and it was clear that the archive had been actively maintained over many years. As the initial survey of the chamber continued, Collins began to realize that they had stumbled upon something far more significant than a simple personal collection. The scope and nature of the materials suggested that Camilla had been systematically documenting and preserving information about the royal family and the British establishment for decades. Whether this was done for personal reasons, as some kind of insurance policy, or for other purposes entirely remained to be determined. The Discovery team worked through the afternoon, carefully cataloging and photographing everything they found without disturbing the original organization of the materials. Each item was given a reference number and photographed in situ before being carefully removed for more detailed examination. The process was painstaking, but everyone involved understood the sensitive nature of what they had uncovered. By evening, it was clear that they had only scratched the surface of the archive's contents. Initial estimates suggested that there were thousands of documents, photographs, and recordings stored in the underground chamber. The logistics of properly examining and cataloging everything would require a much larger team and considerably more time than anyone had initially anticipated. Collins made the decision to secure the site overnight and resume operations the following morning with additional personnel and equipment. The chamber was resealed, and security guards were posted around the clock to ensure that news of the discovery didn't leak beyond the immediate circle of those already involved. Everyone present was required to sign additional confidentiality agreements, and their mobile phones were confiscated to prevent any unauthorized communications or photographs. As Thomas Hartwell made his way home that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that his routine maintenance work had uncovered something that would have far-reaching consequences. The weight of what he had discovered was beginning to sink in, and he found himself wondering how long the secrets buried beneath the ancient oak tree had been waiting to be revealed. What he couldn't have known was that his discovery was just the beginning of a story that would ultimately challenge everything the public thought they knew about Queen Camilla and her relationship with the royal family. The following morning brought with it an entirely different atmosphere at Raymill House. What had begun as a simple groundskeeping operation had evolved overnight into a major security operation. Sarah Collins had spent most of the evening coordinating with senior officials from various government departments, and by dawn, the estate was crawling with specialists from the royal household, the cabinet office, and what appeared to be representatives from the intelligence services. Dr. Elizabeth Forrester, the Royal Collection's chief archivist, arrived at first light accompanied by a team of document specialists and forensic experts. Dr. Forrester had spent 30 years managing the royal family's official archives and had seen virtually every significant document in the royal collection. But even she seemed taken aback by the preliminary reports of what had been discovered beneath the oak tree. The operation to properly examine the underground chamber began in earnest at 7 in the morning. A series of powerful lights had been installed to illuminate the space, and sophisticated climate control equipment ensured that the delicate documents and photographs wouldn't be damaged during the examination process. Every item removed from the chamber was immediately photographed, cataloged, and placed in protective storage containers before being transported to a secure facility that had been hastily established in one of the estate's outbuildings. The first major revelation came when Dr. Forrester's team began examining the journals in detail. The earliest entries, dating from 1971, revealed a level of insight into the royal family that was both intimate and unprecedented. Camilla's observations about the various members of the royal circle were detailed, perceptive, and often surprisingly candid. She had documented private conversations, family disputes, and personal struggles with the precision of a trained observer. One journal entry from 1973 described a private dinner party where Prince Charles had confided his frustrations about the pressures of his position and his uncertainty about his future role. The level of detail was extraordinary, including direct quotes from conversations and observations about Charles's emotional state that painted a picture of a young man struggling with the weight of expectation and duty. These weren't the sanitized glimpses of royal life that the public was accustomed to seeing, but rather raw, unfiltered observations of real people dealing with extraordinary circumstances. But it was the discovery of what appeared to be a complete collection of correspondence between Charles and Camilla during his marriage to Diana that truly shocked the examination team. The letters, carefully preserved and organized chronologically, provided an intimate window into one of the most controversial periods in modern royal history. The correspondence revealed the depth of Charles and Camilla's emotional connection during a time when the official narrative suggested they had minimal contact. Dr. Forrester found herself reading letters that contradicted much of what had been publicly stated about the timeline of Charles and Camilla's relationship. The correspondence suggested that their emotional and intellectual connection had never truly been severed, even during Charles's marriage to Diana. More troubling were references to meetings and communications that had been categorically denied by official sources at the time. The photograph collection proved equally revealing. Among the hundreds of images were candid shots of Charles and Camilla together during periods when they were supposedly estranged. The photos showed them at private gatherings, intimate dinners, and what appeared to be romantic getaways. Many of the images had been taken by professional photographers, suggesting that these weren't simply casual snapshots, but rather deliberately commissioned documentation of their relationship. One particularly striking series of photographs showed Charles and Camilla at what appeared to be a private ceremony or celebration. The images were dated from a period during Charles's marriage to Diana, when any public acknowledgement of his relationship with Camilla would have created a major scandal. The photos showed the couple exchanging what appeared to be rings or some other form of ceremonial jewelry, raising questions about the nature of their commitment to each other during this sensitive period. The transcripts of recorded conversations proved to be the most sensitive discovery yet. The documents suggested that someone had been systematically recording private telephone conversations involving senior members of the royal family, government ministers, and other influential figures. The transcripts covered a period spanning nearly 2 decades and included conversations that revealed sensitive information about government policy, family disputes, and personal scandals. One transcript that particularly concerned the examination team was a recorded conversation between Prince Charles and a senior government minister discussing the handling of media coverage during Diana's final years. The conversation suggested a level of coordination between the royal household and government officials that went far beyond what had been publicly acknowledged. References in the transcript to managing the narrative and protecting the institution raised serious questions about the extent to which Diana's public image had been deliberately manipulated. Another series of transcripts documented conversations between various members of the royal family discussing succession planning and the potential abdication of Queen Elizabeth II. These discussions had taken place years before any public consideration of such matters, suggesting that senior royals had been privately planning for the transition of power long before it became a public topic. The level of detail in these planning discussions was extraordinary, covering everything from media strategy to constitutional implications. Dr. Forrester's team also discovered a collection of what appeared to be intelligence reports on various individuals who had been romantically linked to members of the royal family. These reports contained detailed background information, financial analyses, and what appeared to be surveillance data on people who had dated or been associated with senior royals. The existence of such reports raised serious questions about the extent of official monitoring of the royal family's personal relationships. Among the most disturbing discoveries were files containing what appeared to be compromising photographs and documents related to various public figures, including politicians, media personalities, and business leaders. These files were organized with the same meticulous care as the rest of the archive, suggesting that they were considered equally important to Camilla's overall collection. The implications were staggering. Had the future queen consort been systematically collecting information that could be used to influence or control important figures in British society? One file that particularly concerned the examination team was labeled Media Contacts and contained detailed profiles of journalists, editors, and media executives. The profiles included personal information, financial details, and what appeared to be records of payments or other forms of compensation. The suggestion that senior royals might have been systematically cultivating and potentially compromising media figures was deeply troubling and raised serious questions about the independence of royal coverage in the British press. The technical sophistication of the archive was becoming increasingly apparent as the examination continued. The underground chamber had been equipped with climate control systems, security measures, and organizational tools that suggested professional-level document management. This wasn't simply a personal collection that had grown organically over time, but rather a systematic effort to create and maintain a comprehensive archive of sensitive information. Computer analysis of the documents revealed that many of them had been created or updated using equipment and software that placed their creation or modification much more recently than their apparent dates suggested. This raised the possibility that the archive had been actively maintained and updated over many years, with new information being added and existing documents being revised or enhanced. The discovery of modern recording equipment and surveillance devices hidden within the archive suggested that the information gathering had been ongoing rather than historical. High-quality audio recording devices, sophisticated cameras, and what appeared to be communication interception equipment indicated that whoever was responsible for maintaining the archive had access to technology and resources that went far beyond what would typically be available to a private individual. As the examination entered its second day, the scale and implications of the discovery were becoming increasingly clear. This wasn't simply a collection of personal memorabilia or even a comprehensive historical archive, but rather what appeared to be a systematic intelligence operation that had been conducted over decades. The level of organization, the scope of the information, and the sophisticated methods used to gather and preserve the materials suggested resources and capabilities that raised serious questions about who was ultimately responsible for the archive's creation and maintenance. Dr. Forrester found herself grappling with the professional and ethical implications of what her team had uncovered. As the Royal Collection's chief archivist, she had always maintained strict standards of confidentiality and discretion, but the materials in Camilla's archive went far beyond anything she had previously encountered. The potential impact on the royal family, the government, and numerous private individuals was enormous, and the decision about how to proceed would require careful consideration at the highest levels of authority. The examination team had established strict protocols for handling the sensitive materials, but the sheer volume and complexity of the archive meant that a complete assessment would take weeks or even months. Each document required careful authentication, cross-referencing, and analysis to determine its significance and implications. The photographs needed technical analysis to verify their authenticity and establish precise dates and locations. The recorded conversations required voice analysis and comparison with known recordings to confirm their legitimacy. As word of the discovery began to filter through the highest levels of government and the royal household, the pressure to contain the information was becoming intense. Representatives from various departments had already begun discussing the legal and constitutional implications of the archive's contents, and there were whispered conversations about invoking official secrecy provisions to prevent any public disclosure. The investigation had also revealed that the underground chamber was not the only hiding place on the estate. Ground-penetrating radar had identified several other anomalies beneath the grounds of Raymill House, suggesting that additional caches of information might be waiting to be discovered. The possibility that Camilla had created multiple secure storage locations for sensitive materials added another layer of complexity to an already extraordinary situation. By the end of the second day, it was clear that what had been discovered beneath the ancient oak tree was just the beginning of a much larger story. The archive represented decades of systematic information gathering that had been conducted with professional-level sophistication and resources. The implications for the royal family, the British government, and numerous individuals whose private lives had been documented were staggering, and the investigation had only just begun. The third day of the investigation brought an entirely new level of urgency to the situation at Raymill House. Overnight, the discovery had escalated from a royal household matter to an issue of national security. Senior officials from the Cabinet Office, the Home Office, and what appeared to be representatives from MI5 had descended upon the estate, transforming the quiet Wiltshire countryside into a high-security operation zone. Sir Marcus Thornfield, the Cabinet Secretary, arrived at dawn accompanied by a convoy of black vehicles and a security detail that spoke to the seriousness with which Whitehall was treating the situation. Sir Marcus, a career civil servant known for his discretion and unflappable demeanor, had spent 35 years managing sensitive government business, but even he seemed visibly concerned by what the initial reports had revealed. The temporary command center that had been established in the estate's main house was now operating around the clock, with secure communication lines to Downing Street, Buckingham Palace, and various intelligence agencies. The level of activity suggested that the implications of Camilla's archive extended far beyond the royal family and into the heart of the British establishment. Dr. Forrester's examination team had been supplemented by specialists from the Government Communications Headquarters, GCHQ, experts in document authentication from the Foreign Office, and what appeared to be behavioral analysts from the intelligence services. The multidisciplinary approach suggested that the investigation had moved beyond simple archival research into a comprehensive assessment of potential threats to national security. The analysis of the recorded conversations had revealed information that was causing serious concern in government circles. Several of the transcripts contained discussions of classified government business, including details of cabinet discussions, intelligence operations, and diplomatic negotiations that should never have been accessible to unauthorized individuals. The suggestion that someone had been systematically intercepting high-level government communications for decades represented a potential security breach of unprecedented proportions. One particular transcript that had caused immediate alarm documented a conversation between the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary discussing military operations in the Middle East. The conversation contained operational details, troop movements, and strategic planning that was classified at the highest levels of government. The fact that this information had been captured and preserved in Camilla's private archive raised serious questions about the security of government communications and the potential for ongoing intelligence breaches. The technical analysis of the recording equipment found in the underground chamber had revealed capabilities that went far beyond simple audio recording. Sophisticated communication interception devices suggested the ability to monitor mobile phone communications, internet traffic, and even encrypted government transmissions. The equipment was of professional grade, typically available only to intelligence agencies or other authorized government departments. Intelligence analysts had also discovered evidence that the information-gathering operation had international connections. Several documents in the archive contained references to meetings and communications with foreign nationals, including individuals known to have connections with foreign intelligence services. The possibility that sensitive information about the British government and royal family had been shared with foreign entities added another layer of complexity to an already serious situation. The examination of Camilla's personal journals had revealed a level of strategic thinking that surprised many of the investigators. Rather than simple diary entries, many of the journal passages read like intelligence assessments, with careful analysis of political situations, personality profiles of key figures, and strategic recommendations for various scenarios. The level of sophistication suggested either extensive training in intelligence analysis or access to professional guidance and support. One journal entry from 1997, written shortly before Diana's death, contained detailed analysis of the potential consequences of various outcomes to the ongoing marital crisis. The entry included strategic assessments of media management, public relations implications, and even succession planning considerations. The level of detail and forward-thinking suggested that Camilla had been actively planning for various contingencies years before they became reality. The photograph collection had also yielded disturbing revelations under more detailed analysis. Digital forensics experts had determined that many of the images had been taken using sophisticated surveillance equipment rather than conventional cameras. Hidden cameras, long-range telephoto lenses, and other surveillance technology had been used to capture images of private moments, family gatherings, and confidential meetings. The systematic nature of the photographic surveillance suggested a coordinated operation rather than casual documentation. Among the most concerning discoveries were photographs taken inside secure government facilities, including images from inside Number 10, Downing Street, the Foreign Office, and what appeared to be classified briefing rooms. The existence of such photographs raised serious questions about security protocols and suggested that the surveillance operation had penetrated the highest levels of government. The financial records discovered in the archive painted a picture of an operation with substantial funding and resources. Bank statements, payment records, and investment portfolios suggested access to significant financial resources that went far beyond what would be expected from personal wealth. The sources of this funding were not immediately apparent, but the scale suggested institutional rather than individual backing. One particularly intriguing set of financial records documented payments to what appeared to be a network of informants and sources across British society. Journalists, government officials, palace staff, and various other individuals had apparently received regular payments through a complex system of shell companies and offshore accounts. The suggestion that Camilla had been operating a paid intelligence network for decades was both shocking and deeply troubling. The legal implications of the discovery were becoming increasingly complex as the investigation progressed. Government lawyers had been called in to assess potential violations of the Official Secrets Act, privacy laws, and various other statutes. The collection and storage of classified government information by unauthorized individuals was clearly illegal, but the involvement of a senior member of the royal family complicated the legal response. Constitutional experts had also been consulted about the unprecedented nature of the situation. The discovery that the Queen Consort had potentially been conducting unauthorized intelligence operations raised fundamental questions about the relationship between the monarchy and the state. The constitutional principle that the monarch acts on the advice of ministers assumed that royal activities were conducted within established legal and political frameworks, but Camilla's archive suggested operations that had been conducted entirely outside official oversight. The investigation had also revealed evidence of ongoing operations rather than simply historical activities. Computer equipment found in the archive contained recent files, current communication logs, and what appeared to be real-time surveillance feeds. The suggestion that the intelligence gathering was continuing even after Camilla had become Queen Consort added urgency to the government's response. Security experts had identified multiple vulnerabilities in government communication systems that appeared to have been exploited by whoever was responsible for the intelligence operation. The sophistication of the interception capabilities suggested either insider access or foreign intelligence involvement, both of which represented serious threats to national security. The international implications were also becoming clearer as the investigation progressed. Several foreign intelligence agencies had been contacted to assess whether their communications with British counterparts had been compromised. The potential for foreign governments to have gained access to British state secrets through Camilla's intelligence operation was causing serious concern in diplomatic circles. Prime Minister's office had established a crisis management team to coordinate the government's response to the developing situation. The team included senior representatives from all relevant government departments, intelligence agencies, and legal advisors. The complexity of the situation, involving as it did the royal family, national security, and potential criminal activity, required careful coordination across multiple areas of government. The media management aspect of the crisis was proving particularly challenging. While the discovery remained officially secret, rumors and speculation were already beginning to circulate in political and journalistic circles. The government's press office was preparing contingency plans for various disclosure scenarios, but the sensitivity of the information made any public communication extremely difficult. Behind closed doors, serious discussions were taking place about the potential consequences for the monarchy itself. The revelation that the Queen Consort had been conducting unauthorized intelligence operations for decades raised fundamental questions about the fitness of the royal family to serve as constitutional heads of state. Some officials were quietly discussing the possibility of demanding Camilla's abdication or the implementation of new oversight mechanisms for royal activities. The investigation had also revealed connections between Camilla's intelligence operation and various private entities, including security companies, private investigation firms, and what appeared to be foreign business interests. The complex web of relationships suggested that the operation had grown far beyond a personal information gathering exercise into something resembling a private intelligence agency. Technical experts were continuing to analyze the communication equipment found in the archive to determine the full extent of its capabilities and the scope of the surveillance operation. Preliminary assessments suggested that the system had been capable of intercepting communications across multiple platforms and technologies, potentially affecting hundreds or even thousands of individuals over the years. The human cost of the intelligence operation was also becoming apparent as investigators identified individuals whose private lives had been systematically monitored and documented. The archive contained detailed files on family relationships, personal struggles, financial difficulties, and other intimate aspects of the lives of numerous public figures and private citizens. As the investigation entered its fourth day, the scale and implications of what had been discovered beneath the ancient oak tree at Raymill House were continuing to expand. What had begun as a groundskeeper's routine maintenance task had evolved into a national security crisis that threatened to shake the foundations of the British establishment. The questions raised by Camilla's secret archive would require answers at the highest levels of government, and those answers would ultimately determine not just the future of the monarchy, but the security and integrity of the British state itself. The revelation of Camilla's secret intelligence operation had sent shockwaves through the royal family that reverberated far beyond the walls of Buckingham Palace. King Charles III, who had been attending a series of state engagements in Scotland, was immediately recalled to London under the pretext of urgent constitutional business. The carefully choreographed world of royal protocol was struggling to contain a crisis that threatened to undermine the very foundations of the modern monarchy. Sir Clive Alderton, the king's private secretary, had spent a sleepless night coordinating with various government departments and royal advisors in an attempt to assess the full implications of what had been discovered at Raymill House. The preliminary briefings he had received painted a picture so disturbing that even his decades of experience managing royal crises had not prepared him for this level of complexity and potential damage. The king's immediate reaction, according to those present at the emergency briefing, was one of complete shock and disbelief. Charles had been married to Camilla for nearly 20 years, and the suggestion that she had been conducting an elaborate intelligence operation throughout their relationship was almost impossible to reconcile with the woman he thought he knew. The personal betrayal was devastating, but the constitutional implications were even more serious. Princess Anne, known for her direct approach to difficult situations, had been among the first senior royals to be briefed on the discovery. Her response was characteristically blunt. How could the family have been so completely unaware of such an extensive operation being conducted by one of their own members? The questions she raised about security protocols and internal oversight would prove to be among the most difficult for the royal household to answer. Prince William, as heir to the throne, was facing the possibility that the monarchy his father had inherited might not survive this crisis intact. The careful modernization efforts that had been undertaken to restore public confidence in the royal family after decades of scandals were now threatened by revelations that made previous controversies seem insignificant by comparison. The suggestion that the Queen Consort had been operating a private intelligence network cast doubt on everything the public had been told about the royal family's commitment to constitutional propriety. The Queen's equerries and ladies-in-waiting found themselves under intense scrutiny as investigators attempted to determine how much of Camilla's activities had been known to the royal household staff. Several long-serving members of her personal staff were questioned about their knowledge of unusual activities, frequent private meetings, and the sophisticated security arrangements that had apparently been implemented at Raymill House without official authorization. Lady Sarah Richardson, Camilla's closest confidant and unofficial advisor, had been among the first to be questioned by investigators. Lady Sarah, a former diplomat who had known Camilla since their school days, insisted that she had never been aware of any intelligence-gathering activities. However, investigators had found references to Lady Sarah in several of the archived documents, suggesting a level of involvement that contradicted her initial statements. The Royal Protection Squad found itself in an impossible position, caught between their duty to protect the royal family and the growing evidence that one of their principal charges had been conducting activities that potentially compromised national security. Several protection officers who had been assigned to Camilla over the years were brought in for questioning about their observations of unusual activities or visitors to royal residences. Detective Chief Inspector Michael Hartley, who had served as Camilla's principal protection officer for over a decade, revealed during questioning that he had occasionally noticed sophisticated electronic equipment at Raymill House that seemed inconsistent with normal residential security systems. He had assumed that these were enhanced security measures approved by the appropriate authorities, but the investigation was revealing that many of the installations had been implemented without official authorization. The implications for the royal family's relationship with the intelligence services were particularly troubling. MI5 and MI6 had long-standing protocols for sharing information with senior royals when necessary for security purposes. But the discovery that Camilla had apparently been conducting her own intelligence operations raised serious questions about the boundaries between official and unofficial activities. Sir Richard Moore, the chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, had been called in for urgent consultations about the potential security implications of Camilla's archive. The suggestion that classified government information had been compromised by someone within the royal family represented an unprecedented breach of the traditional separation between the monarch's constitutional role and the operational activities of the security services. The investigation had also revealed evidence that Camilla's intelligence network had been monitoring other members of the royal family themselves. Surveillance files had been found containing detailed information about the private activities, relationships, and communications of various royals, including the king himself. The suggestion that Camilla had been spying on her own family added a deeply personal dimension to the constitutional crisis. One particularly disturbing file contained detailed surveillance reports on Prince William and Catherine's marriage during its early years, including what appeared to be transcripts of private conversations and photographs of intimate family moments. The systematic nature of the surveillance suggested that it had been conducted for purposes beyond simple personal interest or family security. The archive had also contained detailed files on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, including surveillance reports from the period leading up to their decision to leave royal duties. The files suggested that Camilla's intelligence operation had been actively monitoring the couple's activities and communications, potentially including their interactions with media figures and legal advisors during their departure negotiations. King Charles was facing the devastating realization that his wife had apparently been systematically gathering intelligence on their family, while simultaneously presenting herself as a loyal and supportive partner. The personal betrayal was compounded by the professional implications, as the king's constitutional role required him to maintain the confidence and trust of the government and the British people. The royal family's financial arrangements were also coming under scrutiny as investigators attempted to determine how Camilla's intelligence operation had been funded. The Duchy of Cornwall, the sovereign grant, and various private royal investments were being examined for any evidence of funds being diverted to support unauthorized activities. Crown estate officials had been called in to review property records and facility modifications at various royal residences to determine whether other locations might contain similar hidden installations. The possibility that the underground chamber at Raymill House was